Hello from Germany. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to this AMSES conference. I want to make it clear that I don't represent a large organization here in Germany. There are several self-help groups for people with environmental diseases in Germany, which are a great help for those affected. Unfortunately, we don't have an organization as large or as well-resourced as your association in Canada, which is known for its comprehensive activities, and the work you do is truly amazing and of great importance to all of us dealing with these issues. And I want to sincerely thank each and every one of you in the Canadian Association for your dedication and efforts. But let's come back to your question. I founded the support group in our region in 2018 because face-to-face meetings can often be challenging for MSS patients due to the health situation and various environmental factors. We use social media tools for communication and to keep in contact. And this has allowed us to establish a nationwide network of individuals living with MCS. There were MCS patients in our region who were looking for a self-help group but couldn't find one. And this gap in support inspired me to take action, as I believe that no one should navigate the complexities of this serious illness alone. MCS is a condition that profoundly impacts the lives of those affected. Because it is a fairly unknown disease, those affected have to do a lot of research and learning on their own. There is no centralized source of information here in Germany, and so it takes a long time to get the necessary knowledge about MCS and the necessary lifestyle changes. But the sooner individuals have access to helpful resources and experience sharing, the better equipped they are to deal with their condition. And I'm convinced that it is important to make the right measures as soon as possible and to avoid the wrong measures in order to avoid a negative health trend. For example, in my case, I could have avoided some adverse treatment procedures if I had had more information about MCS earlier. Therefore, it is our intention to support MCS patients by sharing the knowledge and experience we have gained. By creating a supportive network, we can help those affected to connect with each other, share coping skills, and find understanding in a world that is often unaware of their problems. MCS is an invisible disability, and this invisibility can lead to a lack of acceptance and understanding from those around us. MCS is also a challenge for social relationships, and unfortunately, many social contacts are lost. Our aim is therefore to educate not only patients, but also their families and friends, and to create a more informed and compassionate social environment, because MCS patients need understanding and support. Many things that are easy and normal for other people are a challenge for MCS patients. If you react to many materials, sometimes it becomes really difficult to buy clothes or appliances, for example. MCS is also a problem when treating other diseases. What do you do if you can no longer tolerate medication or dental materials? And coping with everyday life is also difficult. For example, when shopping or visiting the doctor. Indoor air quality is usually enriched with chemicals from disinfectants and cleaning agents or fragrances. This air quality problem also prevents many MCS patients from participating in normal social life. MCS is changing their whole life. Well, the concerns are very different. There are questions about possible tools for everyday life that is tolerable and effective air purifiers for MCS patients. And people often look for solutions to problems such as how to make clothes or furniture fragrance-free again if they have been contaminated by contact persons. But the most frequent questions are certainly those about doctors and dentists who are well versed in MCS, or when MCS patients have problems with applications, which is unfortunately often the case. For example, to be recognized as severely disabled, or to receive early retirement because they are no longer able to work. Unfortunately, knowledge about MCS and the associated effects is not widespread and the medical field either. The impairments are generally underestimated, which means that applications from seriously ill people are often rejected. MCS patients would need the right specialists here for medical reports, and they often don't know where to go. That's really a big problem. The number of contact requests regarding MCS has increased slightly, but that could also be the result of the fact that I launched a website about MCS in 2022. Many individuals living with MCS appreciate this information. However, it's important to note that many people may be suffering from MCS without even realizing it, largely due to the lack of awareness surrounding this condition, not only among the general public, but also within the medical community. As a result, MCS is often misdiagnosed or assigned an incorrect diagnosis code. Symptoms may be mistakenly attributed to other illnesses or even misclassified as mental health issues. In Germany, MCS is categorized under code T78.4 in the ICD diagnosis coding system, recognized as a physical illness caused by external factors. This code encompasses non-specific hypersensitivity, but can also overlap with various allergies. So there are several reasons why the number of MCS patients in Germany cannot be quantified. One of the leading MCS experts in our country, Dr. Müller, stated in an interview in 2022 that he estimates between 5 and 7% of the German population may be affected by this condition, of course in different degrees of severity. In our group, around 80% are women who are middle-aged or older, but there are also more and more younger people who have the disease and are losing their future perspectives because they cannot find a secure job or adequate treatment. In Facebook groups, people keep reporting that they have had the problem of suffering from MCS since birth. There might be a shift within the age groups in the future. This doesn't seem strange to me when considering that US researchers have found 109 different industrial chemicals in the blood of newborns, for example. In terms of professions, I noticed that many members of our group used to work in laboratories and the medical field or as teachers. The intolerances, be it substances, materials, or foods, are very different. However, it has been observed time and again that intolerances worsen and MCS sufferers react to more and more substances. So if someone has no problems with fragrances, for example, today, it may be a different story tomorrow. However, MCS sufferers often don't recognize the triggers of their symptoms because they're following the habits and don't associate everyday things with symptoms such as dizziness or fatigue. Sick people usually turn to their primary care physician first. However, even the Robert Koch Institute published a report in 2020 stating that doctors' basic qualifications are not sufficient to recognize and treat environmental diseases, and that there are far too few specialists in this medical field. The standard medical examinations by the family doctor usually do not reveal any major abnormalities. However, the symptoms of MCS patients usually get worse and they are sent to other specialists. But if these doctors cannot find anything in their field of expertise, there's still no diagnosis. So these sick people usually first have to find out that there's such a strange thing as MCS. Then they have to learn that this disease belongs to the field of environmental medicine. But in Germany, there are two types of environmental medicine that have been discussing MCS controversially for decades. There is environmental medicine, with the subject disciplines of toxicology and occupational medicine. And he is often doubted that physical symptoms can also appear below certain concentrations of substances. The other field of environmental medicine takes into consideration the individual predisposition and situation of the patient and is referred to as clinical environmental medicine. And in this field, MCS is recognized as a physical illness. I cannot explain this very well now. I'm not a doctor, so hopefully I've described it more or less correctly. Because MCS patients first have to find a doctor who is well-versed in MCS, it is not easy to get a diagnosis. But it doesn't get any easier after that. Many people hope for a successful therapy once the disease has been recognized. But unfortunately, this doesn't usually exist with MCS. At least it is very individual. And it becomes more complicated the more severe the chronification is, because then further regulation processes in the body are disrupted. The problems therefore decrease in terms of health, ability to work, and coping with everyday life, and often also in relationships and the social environment, and unfortunately also among doctors. The reactions are predominantly without understanding. It's all very stressful. Many patients get into financial difficulties through no fault of their own. On the one hand, they are often no longer able to work and suffer a loss of income as a result. On the other hand, they have high expenses for their health, as these environmental medical visits to the doctor, laboratory tests, and treatment methods are usually not covered by health insurance companies. And because many MCS sufferers are denied early retirement or the amount is very low, a large number of these patients unfortunately have financial problems and are dependent on social support. For many individuals with MCS, the living situation in apartment buildings is stressful for the health. There are many factors that affect this. Intolerable building substances or mold contamination can cause symptoms, but many other things can affect the quality of indoor air. Many individuals with MCS therefore live very simply with little and only second-hand furniture, but there are some things they have no influence on. For example, prescribed equipment that the landlord has to install and which causes a health problem for MCS patients due to the vapors from the plastic or flame protection against agents it contains. Why do such regulations not take into account necessary exceptions or more health-friendly materials for sensitive patient groups? And because most neighbors use fragrances or smoke in some form, many MCS patients cannot live in their homes without symptoms. These vapors enter through windows and doors, but also through ventilation shafts and sometimes even through the walls. The desperation here is really enormous. It is also very harmful when paints, varnishes, or solvents are used in the house. It is not uncommon for individuals with MCS to have to find an emergency solution for sleeping, such as in the car. These people are seriously ill and usually live very isolated and withdrawn lives because they cannot tolerate so many environmental factors. And then they can't even protect their health enough in their home. This is more than said. We urgently need better protection for the chronically ill in their homes, such as non-smoking regulations in residential buildings. And we urgently need adequate housing projects for persons with MCS, has already been realized in Switzerland, for example. The mention of MCS was enough for an environmental medicine outpatient clinic to advise me to go to a mental health clinic. They said they had good experience there with spider phobia. There was no examination. I was not given any advice on what further examinations might be helpful. It was only with a doctor of clinical environmental medicine that I really received help. He probably saved my life because my body was trapped in a high stress level due to the constant exposure. And he also recognized which vitamins I was missing in order to be able to physically deal with the stress. But unfortunately, he soon retired. This is a general problem. Many doctors with MCS expertise are retiring or giving up this field. So we have too few doctors who can treat MCS patients. The most important pillars of treatment that German MCS experts use are, as far as I know, elimination of any causes, for example, pollutants in the home, at work, or dental conditions, exposure avoidance to prevent upregulation of MCS, avoiding stress and applying the knowledge of stress medicine, restoring the body's resources through nutritional supplements, also to reduce oxidative stress and silent inflammation in the body, strengthening the detoxification organs, and then only then a careful, gentle detoxification of stored toxins and heavy metals. Unfortunately, the general public and even healthcare professionals are far too little informed about MCS. This is also one reason why this disease and those affected by it are often not accepted. Although international research is making progress, there are hardly any informative articles on the subject in Germany. Even the medical magazine of Clinical Environmental Medicine did not regularly provide information about new study findings on MCS. That is why I have published several articles on MCS in this magazine in recent years, to remind people that we exist and to give interested readers some information about MCS and the situation of MCS patients. Several articles I have also published in the regional press about MCS and the suffering of those affected. I have also tried to support other groups with press releases. Some national press agencies have now shown interest in the MCS issue, but these are isolated cases. There needs to be a lot more reporting to create real awareness of this illness. I also provide a lot of information on our website or via presentations on our YouTube channel. Because increasing exposure to fragrances is also a problem for many patient groups, I have also tried to raise awareness of this issue. And in 2023, for example, we wrote to all health ministers in Germany to point out that exposure to fragrances in healthcare facilities is a major problem for many people. And in 2024, in collaboration with Professor Dr. Klaschka, I was able to launch an international online survey on the problems faced by people who are sensitive to fragrances. And I can only thank Professor Dr. Klaschka for the excellent cooperation and her support. She is a biologist and chemist. She is not a medical doctor and cannot advise MCS patients. Because there are too few MCS experts, we sometimes receive calls for help when patients have to go to hospital because of an accident or similar. Which narcosis can be used, which material should be preferred, what should the hospital doctors pay particular attention to? But we can't help here. We need an emergency service for MCS patients, which means MCS experienced doctors who could give helpful advice. As in other countries, there should be a guide for hospital staff containing important points to consider when admitting an MCS patient. In Germany, we have nothing in this respect to protect the health of MCS patients during a hospital stay in the best possible way. We have samples and ideas and would be happy to help develop proposals, also with regard to information leaflets on MCS, which are unfortunately also missing. But we need the Association of Clinical Environmental Medicine to professionally correct and confirm such documents. As mentioned earlier, there are controversial discussions about MCS among doctors in Germany. For example, it was reported in a medical journal that MCS is a mental illness because the criteria for a toxic disease are not met. It was therefore recommended that the treatment of MCS patients with nutritional supplements should be stopped and mental health treatment prescribed. This article can now be found on a number of websites and creates preconceptions. Doctors in clinical environmental medicine have been pointing out for decades that MCS is an inflammatory disease. In my opinion, it would have been important for the relevant doctors or associations to comment on this article with a professional correction. This would be helpful in order to limit the formation and spread of false opinions and avoid any incorrect treatment. We are doing our best in terms of public relations and supporting those affected, but we also need the support of doctors in the field of clinical environmental medicine for German MCS patients, so that a false opinion about the disease does not continue to develop and we can provide better information material. If conventional medicine knows too little about MCS, but the experts in clinical environmental medicine do not support us in such important medical issues, what is to become of this patient group? The health and lives of people with MCS are at stake. That is why I have a big request for doctors and associations of clinical environmental medicine. Please support MCS patients in such important matters. Only then we do have a chance of effectively countering the increasing stigmatization of these patients and of convincing political decision makers of the need for action. We need housing projects for MCS patients, hospital guidelines, and emergency protocols, as well as an emergency folder for MCS patients. We also need better patient protection. It is important to educate clinic staff accordingly. Guidance for hospital staff is also important. For example, a central guideline from the Ministry of Health, as is done in Australia. It is important that MCS is generally accepted as a physical illness and that patients are no longer stigmatized. People with MCS need better protection in the workplace and support in introducing suitable measures so that they can continue to work. We need fragrance-free regulations, for example, in healthcare facilities and public buildings, not only for MCS patients. This would also be important for other patient groups. International examples show that this is practicable. We need a central list with an overview of fragrance-free clinics, clinics with environmental patient rooms, doctors or clinics with MCS experience, clinics with an environmental medicine unit. We need more doctors with competence in treating environmental disease. The fact that mental health therapies have not been successful in healing MCS can be read, for example, in the publication by the Robert Koch Institute from 2020. It also states that early environmental medical care would probably have played a key role in shortening the suffering of MCS patients and preventing subsequent mental stress. As too few doctors are well versed in MCS, we also need a competence center for clinical environmental medicine with which regional primary care physicians or clinicians can work together in the treatment and therapy of MCS patients. With regard to the patient group of MCS sufferers, the increase rate identified in US studies should be alarming. Within 10 years, there has been a threefold increase in the number of MCS patients. This rate of increase is probably due to two factors. On the one hand, the increasing diagnostic competence of doctors is likely to play a role. This means that MCS is finally being recognized and diagnosed as such more often. On the other hand, many people are probably newly affected by MCS. We are simply surrounded by so many harmful substances in our everyday lives that can affect our health. And when various components come together, such as particular predisposition, previous illnesses, extreme stress, and a triggering exposure situation, this can lead to a toxic-induced loss of tolerance, which then results in MCS.